Welcome back to Business Week on Arise News. I'm joined now by Lawrence Amadi, partner and head of tech assurance at KPMG Nigeria, to review some of these top stories in greater detail. Thanks for coming on the show after such a while. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much, Rolake, for having me. Good to be back.
Great to have you, and I hope your travels went well.
So far, so good. Thank you so much.
So we're talking about your core area of expertise, tech. First one is NVIDIA. Now, on my last 2 or 3 shows, we've been talking about this tussle with NVIDIA, Microsoft, all the big tech giants for number one spot. NVIDIA suffered the worst 3-day loss of any business ever.
Yep.
What is accounting for that? What happened? So
I guess it was bound to happen if you grow overnight at such an astronomical rate.
Did they really grow overnight?
They grew overnight. So if you look at the share price, it's been inching $7, $70, $90, $120, $170 per share. Now, if you just look at those numbers, it tells you that they're doing something right to start with. They're embracing AI at a much faster rate.
Right.
They struck a partnership deal with Ooredoo in Middle East Asia, in Qatar. Okay. And I thought that was big because I was going to serve about 4 or 5 countries in Middle East.
Right.
So that partnership, with Saudis and the like in the picture, did also help, skyrocket the share value. But why did it drop? I guess 2 reasons, personally. One, half-year reporting was knocking. Okay. So when you're in June and you're trying to close the books, you could have the tendency of saying, do we balance out the numbers a bit? And 2, some investors would have taken advantage of
taking profit.
Correct.
Selling off.
Correct. So they would have sold off. But is NVIDIA going to still keep skyrocketing? I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's going to finish the year really strong.
And what is the fundamental driver of that in terms of its
So
share price?
Gen AI is getting bigger. And if telcos are adopting, fintechs are thinking about it, manufacturing is driving it. I think those are going to be the fundamentals that help the price keep going up.
Yeah, and of course, they seem to have gotten on the right end of the value chain where they're actually manufacturing chips that are used by so many other companies in the tech ecosystem
100%.
and beyond. Yeah.
Elon Musk, big partner, Tesla, the car manufacturers, IoT, all IoT platforms are all working with NVIDIA.
Yeah. Great stuff. Let's talk about another tech giant. Microsoft seems to have got in trouble again with antitrust legislation. This whole issue about it sort of unbundling Microsoft 365 from Teams. Now it's been fined, I think, or it's about to be fined by the European Commission. So tell us about the dynamics behind that. So
even though they have unbundled Teams, and remember Teams replaced Skype for business.
Right.
This is a retrospective sort of charge slash potential fine.
Right.
The whole argument is about antitrust and about competition. And, in the EU, they like to have a flat system. In the America, otherwise, they like to have, if you're big and you're doing well and you're thriving, get bigger.
Right.
But in Europe, they don't want you to grow faster than competition or too faster than competition. So it's a retrospective look. I know Apple is being fined $2 billion by EU as well for things they've done around Apple Music. And I think it was Spotify some 2 years ago that also said Apple Music wasn't given the room for better sharing, better collaboration. And Apple, they've always had a closed system of some sort. So $2 billion, which I believe they are contesting.
Okay.
We don't know what's going to come to Microsoft, but I think something huge is going to come. And it just happens to you if you're big.
Yeah.
If you're a big tech giant, get ready for these things.
Yeah, the EU is sort of playing the role of a watchdog over consumer rights. But, when you look at the amount of some of these fines, you wonder, are they really making a meaningful difference to these companies who are, reaping hundreds and billions of dollars in profits? So
I would say they are, because if those guys don't fight those fines will get bigger.
Okay.
So they've got to just curtail these fines. And I'll tell you, NVIDIA and the likes, they've got to watch out because in the near future,
they're coming for them.
They're going to come for you.
Especially, we talked about NVIDIA's stock price. It seems to now be leading in that Gen AI chip manufacturing. So
100%.
Watch out for the regulators.
Watch out for the regulators, especially the EU regulators.
The EU regulators, indeed. Great point. So we come to Africa now. Kenya has been in the news, and for reasons which I think can resonate with a lot of Nigerians. The finance bill, the President William Ruto, who has barely been in office for maybe 6 months or thereabouts, had to finally withdraw the bill. On the one hand, observers, it's power to the people foster change in policy. But on the other hand, Kenya has a revenue crunch. It has an IMF support program. It needs to pay bills,
Correct.
pay its bills, and this was one of the conditions, raising taxes, right? So tell us what lies ahead for this country now.
So yes, let me start off by saying power to the Gen Zs.
Unfortunately, people died.
Yes, unfortunately, people died. But I think it's a huge message to African leaders.
Right.
So we understand the drive and the need to balance out your budget deficit.
Right.
Which is why the IMF and the World Bank would insist that you go on some programs. But when you raise taxes, you impoverish people.
Okay.
So they've got to pay more, and the earning power, I don't think, is good enough on the continent, because increasingly, inflation and the macros on the continent is getting worse. South Africa has suffered major currency setback. Egypt, very similar, and Kenya, a key force similar. I'm not talking about Nigeria just yet, but we also have our current issues. So they're trying to raise about $2.7 billion on the tax program. And the East Africans, and I must tell you, even Uganda and the other neighbors, Tanzania, we're all sort of subtly supporting this agitation to push back. So I guess they've got to be creative. What are other countries doing? We got into an oil swap deal with Egypt,
right?
Not too long ago. So they've got to also look back and say, look, what do we do differently? How do we creatively, look for these funds?
Yeah.
By stroke of luck, Nigeria has also been blessed with a bit of Nollywood and the exports in music. So that, to some extent, is also helping some traffic, changing the narrative for the country. I think the government's got to be a bit creative.
Yeah, certainly they have to be a bit creative. And, Kenya also has other types of exports, coffee, tea, even horticulture is
Correct.
a big part.
Yeah.
And services to some extent. But looking at this sort of tussle between Bretton Woods institutions and African governments, we're talking a lot about debt, support programs. If you listen to me, I talked about Ghana restructuring its bond, the IMF support program. Is this also redefining the future of sovereigns' relationships with the likes of the IMF and the World Bank, insofar as the conditions are? Because the IMF came out and said, people asked the IMF, okay, what next? Are you going to withdraw support? But the IMF was very balanced in its response, and it said its priority was Kenya's economic stability.
Correct.
Right. So what are we likely to expect around the relationship between these DFIs, international finance institutions, and African governments?
I think we would expect a relook at the mode of doing this business with these guys going forward. Both the World Bank and the IMF, most times, and this is a personal view, most times they come with their reforms. Countries tend to struggle.
Right.
Perhaps a few would benefit, but the masses are going to suffer for most of those reforms. So it probably would force some sort of relook. Otherwise, we're going to see more of such uprising on the continent. And when you also negotiate the terms of this arrangement, you've got to look at how does it help the common man.
Okay.
If it doesn't put more in their pocket. I mean, in economics, we talk about C plus I plus G, plus X minus M. And this is basically consumption, investment, the government spend, exports minus imports to balance out your GDP. Every single country on the continent, they've got to look at this balance properly and say, look, if we don't drive consumption, we can't also grow.
Absolutely.
And, if we come back home to Nigeria, the SMEs are struggling, businesses are shutting down. It's the ripple effect is increasing unemployment, and crime is going to go up if we don't watch those indices.
Quite a lot to say there. We wish Kenyans the best, and
Amen.
Such a tragic loss of life. Hopefully this doesn't take on a ripple domino effect across the continent, but we'll be watching that closely. The CBN, two more stories before we leave. The CBN is mulling a new regulation for fintechs. This doesn't come as a surprise to all of us. We know the financial services sector is quite regulated, but fintechs have been in the eye of the storm for a while. So tell us what is driving this new compliance charge. And then let's talk a bit about internet subscriptions and the figures we're seeing.
Okay, double whammy. Okay. So that's 2 in 1. Yeah. Let me start with the fintechs. My organization has organized the FinTech Summit 4 years in a row between 2016 to 2020, just before COVID. And we had about 350 plus fintechs at the time. Fast forward 4 years after, the number has shrunk by almost 50%. It tells you that maybe we didn't need as many fintechs when they all started. But it also tells you that the struggle or the challenge is real. Do we need excessive regulation for these guys? I'll probably be on the side of we have to also think about the enablement for us to create even more successful fintechs. I think we need more flutter waves and more pay stacks before we drive extra regulation on these guys. So if I were to suggest, I'll probably say the CBN's probably got to think about how they bring that regulation, so we don't have the shrink even increasing further. And then back to the internet subscription. Let's just say more Gen Alphas are coming on board. So if you look at
please Gen Alphas. You talk about Gen Zs, Gen Alphas. Who are the Gen Alphas?
So the Gen Alphas are the generation after the Gen Zs.
Okay. So age-wise, teenagers.
Age-wise, I think I'd
teenagers.
Say 15, the 10 to 15 kind of bracket.
Right.
Most parents today are handing phones to their 12 and 13-year-olds.
Okay.
So I think as those guys come on board, and we are blessed with the young population.
Right.
So the number is going to go up a bit, because when you look at businesses shutting down, you probably would expect a slight reduction in subscriptions. But what's closing that gap is, parents are onboarding the younger kids, the teens. So that's driving the numbers up. But the telcos need help.
Okay.
Because even though the subscription is going up, they're struggling. They're probably one sector that are unable to increase tariffs as we speak. So while we might be seeing the increasing adoption, I think revenue-wise they're struggling.
Okay.
And they've got foreign investors, they've got to remit dividends in dollars. They can't increase tariffs. But also government is also being careful because we've done the power reform, the petroleum industry. So we've got to just take that with some caution.
Yeah, indeed. And looking at the figures that were flashed on the screen now, October we're at 41% if we can get those figures back on the screen. And then March this year, I think we were just at 43. For a country as big as Nigeria, these figures are still very low for internet subscriptions and penetration. So is it a function of affordability or just infrastructure from an ICT perspective? Infrastructure
is a major challenge. We had some guests during the week talk about right of way and how every single state government, they've got their respective regulation. The price is not unified. So those are also playing a part in the slower adoption. I think we certainly should be doing much better, given where we are. But again, the government they've got their hands full in dealing with these challenges.
Indeed. We have time for one more quick story. Biden and Trump. I know you wanted to talk about it. We saw the reaction of the dollar to that debate. People seem to think Trump won that debate. But, what are the implications of the debate we've had so far before we get to elections on the American economy, the global economy? Big deal or just another turn in the American political?
Very big deal.
Right.
We all know this is one election that the rest of the world looks at. This is one election that drives the stock markets globally.
Right.
We all know Trump during his time. He had his ups and his downs. He won that first debate hands down.
Okay.
And in the history of the first debate, I haven't seen so much
huge
gap. 43 to I think it's 33 to 33 to about 67 or even worse.
Yeah.
I think he nailed Biden on so many things. His response to COVID, the stock market performance, he wasn't fighting any wars, amongst other things. And those are the things that some American families want to hear. So the Republicans look set to take this if the Dems don't do something about this. I don't know if they're going to have to withdraw this candidate and bring a replacement candidate, but I think age is fast catching up.
Yeah, indeed.
On Uncle Joe.
Yeah, very interesting analysis. Lawrence Amadi, Head of Tech Assurance at KPMG Nigeria. Always great to have you. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you so much, Rolake, for having me.
Thank you.